We're going to move on to our next presentation. We have Sarah Tong, a newborn screening parent, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about her experience so far on this ALD journey with her son.
Screen share.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. I don't know if I'm going to do this right at first.
But... Okay, we're here to walk you through it if anything.
Can you see it okay?
Perfect, you're good to go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Tong, and I have the pleasure of being a mother to the most beautiful little boy. This is our family. I'm excited to share our personal experience, and hopefully our story can promote change and help better someone else's experience one day. My son, Rowan Dale Consoletti, was born June 5th, 2019. He came early and he came quickly. The ironic thing about being a parent is for the first time in your life, your heart now lives in another person's body. The whole world revolves around this little being. Therefore, when you hit road bumps, they actually feel like mountains. Since he came early, this led to him being a jaundice baby. We got readmitted into the hospital twice because his bilirubin levels were very high, and he had to be put under the lights each time. Rowan was around a week old, and it was the second time being admitted since his birth. This was such a difficult time. I was a mess sitting alone in a hospital room with a newborn I could not hold or comfort. Then I heard the hospital intercom ring in. It was my son's pediatrician calling me from our hospital room. He told us that Rowan's newborn screening came back abnormal. Naturally, I asked what this meant. He said that he did not feel comfortable discussing what my son was flagged for until Rowan got retested to confirm. Then the phone call abruptly ended before I could object. This led me into a frenzy, Googling what was on the newborn screening test. I was begging the hospital staff to give me more information, and nobody would budge. This was the first moment I died a little bit inside. It was a long week of worry before I got the call from my pediatrician saying the results were in and I needed to come in to discuss them. It was two pediatricians sitting in the room to talk to me. I sat down and they handed me a standard printout of ALD information. They explained what ALD is, how often it can run in families, and then the kicker, they said it would be better if it were cancer because at least then they could do something. Adding, don't get onto Google this, and then I got the go home and enjoy the time you have with your son. I was naturally in deer in headlights, stunned by this appointment. I went to my car and searched as the printout and appointment left me feeling in the twilight zone. The results were terrifying. All I saw was a death sentence. I would stare down at my perfect little boy, so confused how something so cruel was his destiny. To say I was shattered was an understatement. I scheduled the soonest appointment at the geneticist my pediatrician recommended at our local major hospital. This is the most assistance I ever got from our pediatrician. I never received any coordination to help achieve his medical care for my son's diagnosis. I desperately needed help at this point, and walking into this geneticist appointment, I received anything but that. At this appointment, I got explained what cerebral ALD and Addison's disease entailed. They mentioned bone marrow transplant and bone marrow matches. They spoke of the success rate being low and the complications of finding a match. Virtually, I got told how my son had little hope. They were talking about referring my son to get an MRI ordered as soon as possible. I got told it is more likely than not that I gave Rowan ALD, and I probably got ALD from my father. They sent me to get my very long chain fatty acids blood work tested to see if I was a carrier. The geneticist said this elevation meant I was a carrier. Ironically, Rowan did not even get official genetic testing ordered at this point. Looking back, I understand where all the errors were in this visit. I still do not understand why their immediate call of action was to see if I carried this disease instead to see if my son actually had ALD. I learned I had elevated, very long chain fatty acids from a test result sent to my phone through my patient portal app. I'll never forget receiving this result without warning. It was like the whole world around me was still moving, but everything in my life just stopped. I will never forget this moment. At this time, I believe this was my diagnosis as a carrier for ALD because I was told this elevation meant I was a carrier. Nothing about this experience sat right with me. I decided we were going to Boston Children's Hospital instead of pursuing medical treatment and monitoring at this facility. As you know, these things take time. It was a hurry up and wait ordeal. We had to deal with insurance referrals, waiting for an appointment, and getting ping pong from one department to the next. Fast forward to this appointment at Boston Children's. We met with a great geneticist. This was the first doctor we had ever met who had firsthand experience with an ALD patient. This was probably the most packed doctor's appointment ever. Everyone in my close family came to this appointment as we all were so confused and crushed by this diagnosis. My whole family and my fiance's family wanted to get tested to see if we were bone marrow matches for when we believed my son would inevitably need a bone marrow transplant. Yet my son had no official genetic testing done. I believed I was a carrier through elevated, very long chain fatty acids. This geneticist had to backtrack a lot to figure out why we believed what we believed and where all the misinformation came from. Rowan was over a month old at this point. Next, Rowan had the proper testing ordered. It took over 2 months as they were checking for him for all different metabolic disorders. This took multiple appointments and back and forth. Living in this gray zone was miserable. During this time, I researched ALD obsessively. It was finally confirmed that Rowan did have a likely pathogenic mutation in his ABCD1 gene. Shortly after, it was officially confirmed that this mutation did come from me. At this point, we got referred to Mass General to see Dr. Eichler. After this, we decided to inform some family members with boys in the critical age range in our family that likely needed tested. I understand that terrible things like this bring out the worst in people, but some family members took the stance, there is no way my son could have this, and got defensive. Then some other family members had extreme issues getting their boys tested because their pediatricians did not find this test necessary because they had never heard of ALD. This was a super uncomfortable situation to be put in, as when others get defensive, it's hard not to take the stance. Why do you think your son couldn't have this disease, but mine does? This was an extraordinarily draining time. Being a mother who passes a disease like this to a child is absolutely soul-crushing. Truly, the thing about a family diagnosis like this, it is like a big bowl of spaghetti where everything is so intertwined. Nothing was isolated about this diagnosis. I remember weeks of just holding my newborn's head, bawling my eyes out. It was impossible to compartmentalize or cope, and that led to a lot of trauma. I could not find anyone in the same shoes as me. I would sit there staring at the Facebook groups, avoiding joining because I believed all there was behind this group was stories of death. I did not think I could emotionally handle one more person saying my son was going to die. Simply put, with the help of misinformed medical professionals, I decided that when my son dies, I will too. That may sound dramatic with all the hope we carry for newborn screen babies, but nobody introduced me to this hope until my son was over 7 months old. This was a long time to believe the worst was inevitable. I had read every article out there about ALD. I obsessed with researching just to find a glimmer of hope. And honestly, I did not find any hope until I spoke to a nurse practitioner that works closely with ALD patients at Mass General on the phone. It was the first time I heard your son will be okay. That was the first time I could breathe since I met ALD. After this, we waited another month or so before having an appointment at Mass General. At this appointment, we met with a geneticist, the neurology team, and endocrinology. This was the turning point to our story and the biggest relief. Meeting with Dr. Eichler and his team changed everything. For the first time, I did not feel alone. I felt understood. I felt heard. I finally felt like we could move past this diagnosis and start living again and planning a future with Rowan in it. It is unbelievably painful. For so long, I was unsure if my son was going to survive. The pure basis of newborn screening is to avoid this pain and heartache, to catch ALD before it takes any more of our beautiful boys way too soon. Yet there is too many traumatizing stories exactly like mine. It comes down to, where is this going wrong? A lot has changed since my son was diagnosed in 2019. This has been changed for the better. I honestly feel like resources for newborn screening families is abundant now, and the support that the community provides is stellar. This community is evolving to better support the rising number of ALD newborn screening babies detected. But as always, there is room for improvement. The biggest being is that when they first get that diagnosis, they need to feel hope instead of despair. Other areas of improvement tie directly into achieving this hope early on into diagnosis, such as definitely understanding the clarification between newborn screening versus late diagnosis. There needs to be a less emphasis on not Googling ALD, instead clarifying that the face of ALD is changing with the help of newborn screening. Local physicians not knowing any sort of standard of care. If they would have maybe even consulted, our story would have been way different. That would have made all the world of difference. These standards of care needs to encourage families from the beginning that since they are so ahead of this disease, they are in the best shoes possible to make sure their child lives a long and healthy life. I definitely have noticed, even my son's first MRI was at the beginning of COVID, and it definitely led to some delays in getting the results, which no one really knew what was happening at the beginning of COVID, but we definitely need to make sure that you're still like held to the same standard since before to make life easier and more manageable. And definitely better management on medical professionals handling family diagnosis, especially when involving further testing in families to avoid family tension in an already difficult time. You shouldn't feel like the mediator between families and having people tell you that it's not important for other kids to get tested, as you're saying that the worst has happened in your family. I know from my personal experience with newborn screening has been rocky, but I'm thankful for those who have fought tirelessly to give my son this opportunity at life. It may have been executed better by the medical professionals that I was first in contact with, but there's not a second that it has not been worth it. My main goal in sharing my experience is to make sure that others do not have to experience what I did. My experience had such little medical support that I felt like a leaf drifting aimlessly in the wind. I spent the first months of my life working tirelessly towards building a support team for him, and it felt impossible. I hope that future newborn screen families are just embraced in this amazing community and feel safe as they navigate through this diagnosis. Newborn screening is so important, and I am so blessed to be living in a state that tests for ALD. It is unreal that every state does not test for this. I will not lie, I still cry often when ALD crosses my mind, and this anxiety is unreal. I still look in the mirror and feel immeasurable guilt. I work every day to rewrite my thought processes to create a healthy and positive environment for Rowan to grow up in. Rowan is truly a dream come true, and I will not change anything about him for a second. I am so blessed to have the opportunity to be his mother. How he is doing now is that he's doing amazing. All his blood work is clear so far, and his first MRI went great. Now we are in the best shoes possible for him to live a healthy life. I am definitely confident in his medical care. These are just a bunch of great resources that for some reason I had issues finding when he was first diagnosed, but I definitely feel like the newborn screening brochure would have like literally saved my sanity at the beginning. And like with the help of these great resources and everyone fighting for newborn screening, I'm confident that moving forward, stories like mine will diminish. The hope for our boys will win. And moving forward, this is pretty much like the goal. And I think they're attainable with the help of everyone watching today and everyone that fights every day for hope for our boys. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's very hard to do. I've been in your shoes having to relive that part of your life. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to other families and clinicians today, because it's important that we hear the good and the bad of what's going on. Sarah, I want you to take a look in the chat and see all the thanks and praise that you're getting now that you're done presenting. You really are amazing. I want you to see what everyone else had to say about that. And then if there are any questions for Sarah, you can feel free to raise your hand, or I know some people have gone to the chat. Any questions at all about her experience? Or maybe
Sarah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story. I know how emotional it is. Still really emotional for me, and it's 7 years later. So thank you. And I mean, everything you just said is the reason why we have this meeting. Is the whole purpose of newborn screening is to give hope and to know that you're getting diagnosed at the right time. And I'm so sorry that you had such a bad experience. So that's what we're trying to avoid in the future. Thank you.
okay. Maybe if no questions, if there's another newborn screening parent on that wanted to share something that struck with them, we do have a little time before we're going to end this portion.
Thanks, everyone. You're all sweet. But that's like pretty much always been the case since I finally opened myself to the community.
It's hard. I remember staring at my phone too and looking at all the Facebook groups and not being sure, to fully immerse yourself in that world. So I can definitely relate to that part of it. And I know there have been other newborn screening families talking about all these new challenges now that COVID does exist. There's this extra layer of having to get your son tested more than likely if he needs to undergo anesthesia for the scan. We've heard about, some results getting lost and possible delays. And obviously that's not acceptable, when we have to work to the strict schedule. So I know just from speaking to other parents that you're not alone in that situation.